welcome to the next lesson. I think lesson 18 or something. We've done a lot of these. Today, nominalization and what it's all about and how you can do it. And there's really only two big ways in Japanese to do it, so let's go take a look. Well, here we are. I've already prepared, as always, a little title here. Today's topic is going to be nominalization. Basically, turning an action, a verb, into a noun. Now, we're going to look at specifically nominalization with no and koto, which applies to verbs, okay? There's other ways of nominalizing stuff, because everything that can be a noun can be nominalized. Anything that isn't already a noun can kind of be turned into a noun, usually in language or in grammar. Thanks for the follow, Prolific. So, what we're not going to look at today, maybe to set up that right away, what we're not going to learn today is nominalization of adjectives, okay? That's going to be a different episode. Today, we're going to look at nominalization of verbs and verb clauses via the two particles no and koto, okay? And that's, or you could say koto is kind of like it's kind of tricky, like koto is kind of like a particle, it's kind of like a noun. And so is no, by the way. No is also kind of like a noun. So basically, today's topic will be all about taking a verb. We're going to have a verb, and we're basically just going to turn that via nominalization. I'm going to just shorten that to nom. 授業、はい、頑張ります。Via the process of nominalization, we're going to turn that into a noun. Now, there's a few reasons why we would want to do that. Semi, hey, how have you been doing? There's a few reasons why we would want to turn a verb or a verb clause into a noun or a noun phrase. For example, if you want to make statements where an action or like an action clause is the subject or the object, you have to turn it into a noun first. Because generally the position of like subject or object can only be filled with nouns, okay? That's kind of generally true for languages. If you think about English, that's also the case. I can't say verb in the position of subject. That doesn't really work. I can't be like eat is good. No, it doesn't make sense, right? And we wouldn't even, in English, we wouldn't even know how to even conjugate that. We have to actually nominalize it with the gerund. Eating is good. Eating here is actually used as a noun. So in English, a way of nominalizing something is using the gerund, which is the ing form, which did come up when we talked about teiru. But note that just because ing in English is continuous for like teiru, does not mean that the ing that we're going to use for like sentences that we're going to translate today is the same. The gerund is like a bit weird in that it can be both a nominalized version of the noun and the continuous form of the noun. That is kind of strange, and it doesn't not work like that in Japanese. So let's look at what that process of taking a verb or a whole verb clause, because remember clauses end in verbs. Let's look at what that process looks like and what we can do with it, like why it's useful. I mentioned that we can turn it into subjects and objects, but a bit more like tangibly, how does that actually help us, okay? So I'm going to make some space, and then we're just gonna jump right in and look at how we're gonna do it. Basically, people are working on Discord bots, 6 hours. It's addicting, like you get started with it and then you just hack away. I once programmed all night for the Game Grammar Discord bot because it was so much fun. So the basic process is actually super easy, okay? We have two main ways of doing it, and if you can sort of read the title up here, you probably already kind of can imagine what those two ways are, but let me just write them out. Basically, the two ways of doing it is just having a verb and then adding no, or having a verb and then adding koto. Now, there are differences between no and koto here, and we're going to look at them. With no and koto, yeah, basically. There are sort of slight differences here, and we're going to look at those differences. But first, let's look at some examples and what it kind of looks like, okay? Just so you can get a feeling of what I'm talking about. Now, this is the basic structure. Now, overall, of course, there can be some more stuff going on. Is my emote broken? Oh, no, that's just... I think... I don't know, that must be misspelled or something? I don't know. Is my emote broken? It's not broken, is it? So those are the two ways in which we can do that. So let's look at like an example for each. I still have some space here. So, for example, I can just write taberu, and I know I keep using the same verb, but you know, you'll forgive me. It is a nice verb. Taberu no. And it is really true that you don't need to add anything. You can just straight up add the particle, and then here the sentence continues. Okay, and same here. It will look basically exactly the same. We would have taberu koto. Listen, if you don't like taberu, I don't know how to help you. Taberu is a great verb, okay? It's a very nice verb. Taberu koto. But, ukkari-chan, konbanwa. The cool thing about this is that this whole thing now functions like a noun. So we can sort of package it up. We can sort of be like, okay, let's just tie, let's just tie a little bow around it. Let's just put some things here, and let's treat this like a noun, okay? That's weird. It should have worked. Maybe it was just glitched. We have taberu no, and since this does function like a noun now, so I'll make a little n here, we can do all the same things that we could do with a noun. So what is one of the things that you can do with a noun in Japanese? Let's add a whole bunch of particles to it. For example, ai-san, konbanwa. For example, what is like one of the particles you commonly add to nouns? Well, we can make it the topic, right? So, well, I'm gonna make this white so that we don't have too much red. Taberu no wa. Oh, cool. So now we can actually make a statement about the act of eating. Nana is here too. Hello, everyone. And Mochi is here. Taberu no wa. Right? So this is pretty cool. We couldn't do that before. Taberu wa is always wrong. Taberu wa is ungrammatical. You can't just add wa to a verb. That doesn't work. You have to add it to like a noun or a pronoun. But now this works like a noun, so we can do it now. This is making verbs into nouns then. Yes, this is for turning actions into nouns so that we can make statements about them. Think of taberu no as kind of like the act of eating or the action of eating. So now that this is a noun, we can just add wa. We can add a bunch of other stuff. We can add ga, right? We can add ga if we wanted to. And, like I mentioned before, the object, it can be the object as well. We can add o. So this already seems kind of useful, right? Suddenly we can add all these particles that we couldn't before. And again, I'll say this again. This used to not be correct without the no, right? Or, well, it still isn't. When we didn't add this no to nominalize, we can't just add o there. It's never grammatical. But now it is. So now we have a whole bunch of more open possibilities, okay? And the same, of course, goes down here. I'm not going to write it, but imagine just the same principle applying here, where we basically have this unit that we can treat as a noun. But now, the really cool thing is, and I will make some space for that so that I can show you. The really cool thing is that not only can we nominalize a verb, but rather we can kind of nominalize a whole clause. Because remember, clauses end in verbs. And if we just sort of nominalize the verb at the end of the clause, it sort of packages up, it sort of packages the whole clause into like a big noun object kind of thing. And I'll show you an example of that. For example, and I'm going to use the text tool for convenience here. Let's make some text here. All right. Go over here. We're gonna have size, I don't know, like 60 maybe? All right, 60 seems pretty good. And then need to select a different font. Fonts, where are you? This one is a good font. All right, so for example, right? How about we have just a simple act of read a book? How would we say that? We would say hon o yomu. Hon o yomu. That just means read a book. I'll actually make this larger. Just because I can. Haha. Hon o yomu. To read a book. But now, this is a clause, this is a finished clause, a finished sentence actually. If we wanted to, we can add a full stop and be like, okay, read a book. But that's not what we're gonna do today. We're gonna actually nominalize it. So, we are going to, I'm going to select this color. Hon o yomu no. Oops. No. Okay, cool. Now, what have we done? we've sort of now gotten to the point where we have this clause of 本を読む, which is to read a book, and it can kind of act like one noun at this point, right? So this can kind of act like a noun. I mean, I'll add like quotes. It's kind of weird calling a whole clause a noun, but that's sort of how it works. Imagine this whole action of reading a book neatly packaged up into one noun that we can now describe if we wanted to, because remember, one thing that we can do with nouns that's really easy is describe them with adjectives, right? We learned that in like the second or third lesson. For example, we can say stuff like 猫が好きです. I like cats. Why can we do that? Because 猫 is a noun, and then が好き is, or が the particle, and then 好き is an adjective. But now, if we say this is kind of like a noun, there's no reason why we couldn't add like が好き, right? So let me make some space here again, back into text mode. So I can now just add が好き, が好き, oops, が好きです. Alright, cool. Now what does this mean? Well, we have this nominalized phrase over here, 本を読む, to read books, が好きです. So I like to read books. And this is exactly how we can now make statements about clauses or statements about actions. 好き is an adjective, not a noun. Yeah, 好き is an adjective, not a noun. Exactly. Wait, that's what I said though, right? If I didn't, then I misspoke for sure. 本を読むのが好きです. So, we have our... Whoa, seriously, a resub for 7 months. サブスクライブするのは楽しいです。皆さんやってみろ。There you go. That's a good example of using nominalization. You did say it was an adjective. Oh, that's good to know. So here we have our adjective, right? And this thing kind of like our noun, and also, obviously, our subject, right? So, noun. This is also our subject because we use が, nominalized sub. So, all in all, we can now make statements such as I like reading books. And because seriously gave us such a nice sentence there, we'll also look at that in a bit. But so far, I think makes sense, right? Grab a phrase, grab a clause, nominalize it, and then treat it like a noun. So if you want to talk about that clause as the subject, feel free to just do that. 本を読むのが面白いです. Reading a book is interesting. Yeah, another good example from Zora. So basically, very simple. Any clause, any verb, any action, nominalized with no, and then we can say が好きです. This is a very common pattern when you just want to talk about what you like to do. Very useful. So let's look at seriously's example, because it's a bit long, or it uses different words, so that's quite useful to us here. I'm just gonna copy that. 本を読むのは、読解が良くなるに役に立つ。本を読むのは、読解に聞く、読解のために役に立つかも. Something like that. Thanks for the follow, Noes Andre. I'd have to like think about a natural way of saying that. 本を読む. And then it's also a question of should we use koto there. I will actually talk about the difference between no and koto in a bit. It's kind of tricky, okay? So like sometimes when I try and do it like intuitively, still maybe mess it up a bit. But luckily I've prepared a thing where we can actually look at the differences there. But yeah, 本を読むのは読解のためになる. I feel like because what you say is grammatically correct, but I feel like there's a much more natural way of saying it. That's the issue there. Let's make some space so I can do that. Yes, that's probably true. Yeah, I think it's hard to argue against that, I think. Let me make a period there. Oh, of course that didn't fit. There, now it fits. Interesting that it has a space in there. So let's look at this sentence here that Seriously wrote. We have サブスクライブする. So this should be kind of clear, right? It's to subscribe, which is actually used sometimes. サブスクライブする. So to subscribe, のは楽しいです. And then very simply, right? のは楽しいです. It's fun. So same principle. You just have our action. Here actually we have this is also a clause. We talked about this in the past. The shortest clause is always just a verb. So this is a pseudo-verb, but it's also still kind of a clause. So it's nominalized with no, and then we just describe it with wa plus adjective. 楽しいです. Alright, very simple. Now, let's look at some examples of koto. The most common examples that you'll see with koto are actually probably one, koto ga aru or koto ga nai, plus or koto ga dekiru. Okay, those are like two things that I'll introduce to you now that are both very common. Okay, and what they mean. I always get the chotto fushizen. Dude, I'm still at the chotto fushizen level. That's like, it's like shizen is is like is Mount Olympus. Once you've climbed that, once people say like, everything you say is like natural. It's like easier to have a sentence when I'm trying to make it up myself than trying to change someone else's for it to be natural. That's like, because it's harder to take someone else's sentence and then figure out exactly why it is weird, rather than using your own feeling to construct a sentence from zero. But yeah, and like, yeah, it's best to ask a native at that point. You always use the dictionary form of the verb. In this case, yes. You can also use the past tense. It's definitely a sentence ending form that you use. Sometimes you can have like negatives sometimes as well, but mostly it's either dictionary forms or past tense forms that you'll use for that. Like, yeah, but the most common one is dictionary forms. So for example, even if you wanted to say like a past tense sentence, let's say I'm gonna make an example for something that would be past tense, right? I'll do, let me make this, oh, it's white already, good. I'll do, 買い物をするの忘れました, right? This sentence means I forgot to do shopping. I forgot to go shopping. I forgot to do the shopping, right? Because 買い物をする means to go shopping, to go buy stuff, and no o is like no nominalizes it, and then o makes it the direct object. So that's what you forgot. 買い物をするのを忘れました. I forgot to do shopping. Something like しまったのは恥ずかしい. Like, I think you can do like with past tense, pretty sure. Like you can nominalize past tense clauses as well like that. So yeah, like, so like there's also other like ways of doing sort of similar things when you use what we learned about a while ago with relative clauses. For example, I could say the things I did yesterday are embarrassing. So 昨日やったこと、昨日やったことは恥ずかしい. Because they're like, we kind of nominalize it with koto, and then koto also means things, and you can see how there's like an overlap there, where basically the process of nominalization in general is very akin to what we talked about with relative clauses, because yeah, it's very close, because the structure is basically the same. You have a clause plus you have a noun that follows after. And in our case, it's just the nouns are kind of koto or no. But those are like the general nominalizers. Shouldn't it be 忘れました? 忘れていました. Speaker hasn't realized that. I think either one is fine, that the nuance is different. 忘れていました. It depends on who's speaking and who's speaking about who. Like, because now it's like 忘れていました is like, it sounds like a narrative kind of thing. 買い物をするのを忘れていました. I had forgotten about doing shopping. Many will go with what? Where? Go with what? Where? Alright. Let me show you the two examples that I was talking about with koto though. So, two examples with koto that I mentioned is koto ga aru or koto ga nai plus or the other one is koto ga dekiru. Okay, so let's take a look at those actually, so that we can move on and then discuss further nuances with koto and no in general. So, first of all, very simply, if you want to say that you've done something or you haven't done something, you can generally say koto ga aru for if you've done it, or koto ga nai then you haven't done it ever, okay? It's for talking about if you've ever experienced something. Meaning you realized you forgot. Wasurete ita means you've forgotten until now, meaning you realized you forgot. Yeah, but I feel like when you just, I don't know, I'd have to like think about it for longer. I feel like you can say both, but it would change the nuance. But I feel like you could say both, and it would both be correct, but in different ways. But I have to think about it. But I don't want to go too much on a tangent with that, because it's such a small thing. But yeah, we can talk about it maybe after the lesson a bit more, because the teita and stuff is always like very new. It's like different nuances with like the current state of the speaker. So basically, let's talk about countries you've gone to regarding less. Oh yeah, I guess like what kaimono o suru no wa. Are you sure? I'm not sure about that. Maybe. Let's talk about places you've gone to, like countries you've gone to. So for example, we can say, I live in Switzerland, so let's go Switzerland, right? Swiss. Swiss ni itta, Jesus, okay. There, ni itta koto ga, and then we can either say, I'm gonna make a space, aru or nai. For example, right? Or you could say arimasu or nai desu, either way. Kanji o yomanai no ga hazukashii. Yeah, that works. Kanji o yomanai no ga hazukashii. Yomanai koto ga yomanai no ga hazukashii. Either of those could probably work. Let me think what is better. I think no is better. Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah. Again, these are like very nuanced things. I'm gonna talk about them using the thing, using the article that I've prepared. I haven't read that, I didn't write that article myself, but yeah, it's a pretty good one. Yomenai. Oh yeah, if you want to say, yeah, exactly. Yomenai could probably be better. It depends on what you want to say. Either if you want to say not reading kanji is embarrassing, or I can't read kanji and that's embarrassing. Both is grammatically correct. Context. Again, that's the issue, right? That's the issue. Often, many different versions are grammatically correct. So it becomes really nuanced at that point, which is why I don't often go into, like, I don't often go into, like, I try not to go into too much detail because it just gets confusing. And it's kind of unnecessarily confusing because we go away from the main topic, which is normalization, which itself isn't difficult. It's really easy to do. And then it's just a question of how do you make natural sentences with it, which is of course always difficult. No matter what grammar you use, like trying to make a natural sentence is always the hard part. So basically, you can just use this structure. At least this one is easy. It's kind of like a set phrase. When you want to talk about what you've done or what you haven't done, then you can always use koto ga aru or koto ga nai. You don't have to think about using no or no. This is kind of like a set phrase, okay? You can always say this, and it always works. So basically, God, like the thing with the keyboards is such a mess. Swiss ni itta koto, like going to Switzerland ga aru. I've gone to Switzerland before, right? Swiss ni itta koto ga aru. Here is our clause, and here's the nominalization. Oops, nom. Okay, this is where the nominalization happens with koto, and then we just say ga aru, which kind of is like it exists, right? So we're saying, well, going to Switzerland does exist, and the important part here is that we use past tense for the verb. Past tense for the verb, okay? So any action that you can think of, put it into simple past tense, and then just add koto ga aru if you've done it, or you can say koto ga nai if you haven't done it. And obviously the polite version of that would be koto ga arimasu or koto ga nai desu or arimasen. Okay, those would be like the more polite versions of that. But it's a very simple structure, and you've probably heard it, you've probably learned it at some point if you've done any sort of grammar guide. This is usually introduced pretty early as well. Okay, the other thing that koto is used for very, very often is to express your ability to do something. And that looks as follows. Oops, how did that happen? And it looks like this. You use koto ga dekiru or koto ga dekinai. For example, what's something we can do or we can't do? We can say, for example, to swim, right? Maybe I can say I can't swim. So let me emphasize the I, so I'm going to add watashi wa so that we clearly know. Watashi wa oyogu. That's weird. Wait, oyogu. Oh, there's a different oyogu that I had there selected. That must have been the last one I typed. I think that's for something else. Watashi wa oyogu koto ga dekinai. Okay, just very simple. Let's look at what's happening. The structure is the same. We have our clause, which is right here. Watashi wa oyogu. I swim. And so here you could make the argument that this is the clause and the watashi wa kind of is part of this whole thing where, you know, oyogu is just a, how to say, oyogu koto here is just a nominalized action, and the watashi wa is actually more for the overlying clause. So like, you know, it becomes kind of a thing of how you break things up. So maybe here it's a bit more natural to think of the watashi wa to actually belong to the overlying clause rather than this sort of subordinate little clause in here. But it's not that important, to be honest. What's important is just that we're talking about ourselves. So watashi wa I oyogu koto, the act of swimming, ga, this is pretty important. You almost always, that's, well, you can use wa sometimes, but usually you would say koto ga dekinai. Sometimes you could maybe say wa, but it's kind of common to use ga here in this case, especially if you have another topic over here. Then using wa again would be a bit confusing. So you can say koto ga dekinai, so that's just can't swim, right? I'm unable to do the action of swimming. So this means I can't swim. Now, we can also, of course, say the opposite, that we can do it. Dekiru. Oops. Yeah, dekiru. So usually you'll see dekiru in kana only, no kanji. It has kanji. They look like this. I can just show you. Dekiru. You know, oyogenai. Well, oyogenai would be the potential form, which is a bit different. We're going to talk about the potential at some other point, and then I'll mention how it's different. For now, if you want to express, well, if you're at that level where you don't know the potential form yet, and you just learned koto ga dekiru, it's good enough for now. And then once we go to the potential form, when I teach that, we can talk about how it's exactly different, and if it's different, and when it's different. It is different, but it's also very similar. We're talking nuances again. What makes it contrastive, right? Kind of. I've done a whole episode on wa versus ga. It would definitely go way beyond the scope if we're going to talk about wa versus ga again here, because we would have to do it like every time, because wa and ga show up in like every example sentence, so I would have to go into that like every single time. It's not realistic. So those are the kanji. You're not going to see them that much. Watashi wa oyogu koto ga dekiru now means I can swim, right? So anything that you can think of, koto ga dekiru means I can do it. Koto ga dekinai means I cannot do it. Funny enough, the verb dekiru itself is actually, it works as an ichidan verb, but it is also considered the potential of suru. Now, again, I just mentioned that I'm not going to explain the potential form today, but remember that potential form is a conjugation that exists. And it just happens that for suru, it turns into dekiru, which if you think, well, that's crazy, because these are nothing alike, then rest assured this is an exception, okay? Suru is the only verb that changes so dramatically from the normal form to the potential form. This is just a little extra bit of information. All you need to remember is koto ga dekiru, koto ga dekinai for can or cannot do an action, alright? So that's a common use of koto. Especially, so these are like two main uses of koto that you'll see is like action past tense plus koto ga aru, koto ga nai. I've done it or I haven't done it. I have experienced it or I haven't. Or action plus koto ga dekiru, I can do it, I'm able to do it, or dekinai, I'm not able to do it. I can't do it. Right? Those are two very, very common usages of koto, and you don't have to worry too much about to use like koto or no, since they're like set phrases, okay? Now, lastly, let's look a little bit deeper in how we can differentiate between when we should nominalize with no in general and when we should maybe nominalize with koto. I'll say right now that this is pretty nuanced, and it's like you're probably not going to be able to immediately just remember it all, except if you're much better than me. I certainly wasn't able to do that, and I still sometimes don't really think about it all that much. You can sort of just get a feeling for it sometimes, like if you do enough reading and listening, you'll be like, no there sounds kind of weird, maybe koto sounds better. And there's kind of reasons for that, because certain things you'll only see with no, and certain things you'll only see with koto, kind of. So let's actually take a look at these. Now, I'll make space for that. Okay, so I'll start with Let's do no is better when. Okay, no is better when. I know my writing isn't the prettiest here, but let's take that. So there's a few cases where you primarily use no to nominalize a phrase. And I'm going to talk about 3 of them. I'm using this. There's like a really good Stack Exchange article that I've referred to many times. So we're going to use this. You can save this if you ever want to like refer back to it. But yeah, so I'm going to talk about the ones mentioned here because they're a pretty good overview. So here we have like 3 main cases. One is when the following verb, Japanese Stack Exchange is really good, when the following verb has anything to do with your senses. So the ones mentioned in the article are stuff like kiku, kikoeru, miru, mieru, kanjiru. These are all like feeling things that have to do with your senses. Describing nouns, no is more for describing verbs, and koto is for describing actions of verbs. Does that make sense? No, they're the same in that regard, because verbs are actions by definition. Verbs have to be some sort of actions. That's kind of what defines verbs overall. Yeah, I don't think you can't really think of it like that, or at least I don't think it helps. I'm sorry. We are going to look at how they're different right now. So you use no when your senses are involved, okay? Your senses are involved, okay? So, stuff like kikoeru, stuff like miru, right? When you can see something, when you can hear something, stuff like that. That's when you're much better off using no to nominalize the thing that you can see. I'm going to make examples, obviously, or I'm gonna show you the examples from here so that it all kind of makes sense. So here, okay, that's a pretty good example. Alright, so we have an example such as Tonari no ie de dareka ga sakebu no ga kikoeru. Alright, so that's our sentence. We can also use the past tense there. Oh, Kino, thanks for the follow. Arigatou gozaimasu. I appreciate that. Welcome. Good. Let's move you. Jesus. Fiddling with different keyboard layouts and while doing stuff in Photoshop is really annoying. Tonari no ie de, right? Tonari no ie de dareka ga sakebu no ga kikoeru. And here it gets, this is a longer sentence, but might as well use a little bit of a longer one. Personal opinion, no if it's grammatically needed, but doesn't change anything in the nuance. Koto if it's used in specific grammar points like speech or... That's a pretty good rule of thumb for like, as if you're just learning about them, you know, you have to use some sort of rule of thumb, and that's a pretty good one. Like, if you know that it doesn't, if you don't know of any like specific structure that requires no, you can, that requires koto, you can use no. But yeah, there's like exceptions there, but yeah, I mean, you need rule of thumbs when you get started. And you are going to mess up, right? That's just a thing. Like, when you get started, you are going to mess up. Tonari no ie de. Okay, let's look at this, right? At the neighboring house, because they here for location of actions, dareka ga sakebu, someone is screaming. Dareka ga, someone, is ga, subject, right? Subject marker. Someone is screaming. Sakebu, here, sakebu means to scream. I will furiganize that. Sakebu no ga kikoeru. And this here is actually like our main clause. I'll make this red. This is actually mostly our main clause, is kikoeru. I can hear something, right? Nani nani ga kikoeru. I can hear something. What can I hear? I can hear this. This is the subject of the overlying clause. So I'm going to use the colors red and white here. Red for the main clause. I mean, I make these, but it's pretty fair to call it main clause, the overlying clause. So here we have subject and we have verb, and I'm going to use white for the underlying clause. For in the underlying clause, we have subject here and verb here, okay? So note how, I thought it was yobu, it's pretty similar, sakebu, to scream actually. So note how we have these two clauses, tonari no ie de dareka ga sakebu no ga kikoeru. Sakendeiru. I think it's pretty natural to use non-past here, actually. So in the neighboring house, someone scream, のが聞こえる. I can hear that. Okay, so basically we take this whole phrase here, and we turn that into the subject of the overlying clause. So, and that's, you know, that would be why we use no, because we use the verb 聞こえる. Your senses are involved, right? 聞こえる is to hear, so it's hearing. That's a sense that's involved, so it's more natural to use no. If you use 誰かが叫ぶことが聞こえる, that sounds weird. It sounds awkward. It's not good. You should avoid that if you can remember this rule. All right. Now, let me get rid of that, and I'm going to show you the next one. All right. Let's make some space. Number 2 has to do when preceding clause. Let me see. Okay, when the following clause occurs in concert with the preceding clause. Oh, okay. Yeah. So how should we do it? Maybe like when it's simultaneous, maybe, or when they will continue together. So in the article it says it occurs in concert, so maybe let's just copy that phrasing. It's pretty good. When clauses occur in concert, which means together, right? When they occur together. So what that means is that basically when you have verbs like if you need to, if your action sort of continues alongside with the other clause. So those are like things like matsu, when you wait. So imagine when you wait for something to finish, for example, right? For like you're waiting for something to dry, right? So here the example sentence that we have is something like keyboard change. テニスコートが乾くのを待っている. Okay. Hello, Joran. Am I reading that right? Oh, nice. So here, and I will add a little bit of furigana as well for the more difficult kanji here. This is kawaku, which means to dry. Okay. Let me see. I have some space here. So, kawaku. Okay, kawaku. Lian Shi. Thanks for the Lian. Wait, Lilan Shi, there you go. I've seen your name on the Discord server before, or on some Discord server, but yeah, anyways, kawaku. But I haven't never tried to read it out loud, so that's what happens. Tenis koto ga kawaku. And once again, I'm use the two colors white and red. White for the underlying clause, and red for the overlying clause. Okay, so that's kind of what it looks like here. Okay, so this is our direct object. This is our verb on the overlying clause. And the underlying clause, we have a, actually, it's a bit unfortunate that I underlined both of that, but it's fine. We have tenis koto ga, so this is our subject and this is our verb. Tenis koto ga kawaku, the tennis court will dry. No o matteiru, that's what I'm waiting for. So basically, when these two things, that the thing that you're like waiting for and you doing the actual waiting will just continue alongside each other, it's also more natural to use no. This is a bit of a more complicated one. But yeah. Tenis koto ga kawaku no o matteiru. I'm waiting for... what's the difference between kawaku and hosu? It's hard to say, but I feel like kawaku is like to be dry or to dry. That would be like... yeah, for like objects to, when they're like actually wet or when it rained on them or something, waiting for them to not be wet anymore. Kind of, it's very similar. And hosu, I just imagine drying of clothing or fruit, like when you actually dry fruit or something. I'm going to have to practice this. It's a bit difficult. This is very, by the way, let me just say again, once again, this is very nuanced and difficult, and I still open this article every now and again to like help people with stuff, because this is like, and I feel like I'm mentioning them now, so it's interesting to see them, but honestly, to really grasp it all, you're gonna have to just get lots of input and like subconsciously get used to the patterns, in my opinion. So like, it's cool to read this article, and it is really, or to talk about it now, and it's really sort of helping you go in the right direction, but to really absorb it, it just takes a lot of practice and a lot of input to actually get a feeling for it. So tenis koto matsu no ga waku. So there you go, right? And then the last one is a bit simpler because it relies mostly on a specific verb. In our case, or in this case, we're going to look at when tomeru or yameru is used. Let me do that in a way where I don't ruin the rest. Alright, number 3. When the following verb is like tomeru or yameru. When I'm going to do following verb is tomeru or yameru, etc. Like to stop doing something, that's commonly done with no as well. Yameru. Okay, quick example here as well. Draw another text box below. 彼が出て行こうとする。That's a bit of a... Let's use this one. タバコを吸うのをやめましょう。That's much better. タバコを吸うのをやめましょう。Which just means, hey, let's stop smoking cigarettes. Let's stop smoking. Move this down a bit. タバコを吸うのをやめましょう。So basically here, and once again I'm going to use one last time the same thing I did before. White for this タバコを吸う. Here we have subject, verb, and then overlying we have direct object and verb here. Verb, okay? When reading a sentence in Japanese, do your eyes typically look for particles first or verbs, or how is your process? I just read it, but like the particles sort of automatically register as important parts, I guess. After a while, you don't really think about it that much anymore. You just read the sentence. If I don't understand it, then I try and approach it more analytically. But for the most part, when it's around my level, right, when I can kind of read it, I don't think about it too much. I just read the sentence as I go, like I would an English sentence, not worrying too much about what the words are that I'm looking at. So let's stop smoking. タバコを吸う. This is 吸う means to smoke or to suck. タバコを吸うのをやめましょう。タバコを吸うのをやめましょう. So by the way, here you see, as we get more complex and have multiple clauses in a sentence, we will have repeating particles. We have an o here and an o here. When a lot of beginners, when they first start, they think that you can only have like one o in a sentence. That's not true. You can have multiple o in a sentence. You can have multiple ga in a sentence because you can have multiple clauses, and each clause... Sorry, I said this is subject. That's my fault. This is an object, okay? This is a direct object, obviously, because we have o. When you have a subordinate clause like this, you can have an object in there. So, tabako o is the object of the subordinate clause. And then the whole nominalized, again, that's kind of what we're talking about. The whole nominalized clause is the object of the overlying clause, okay? So, the thing that you're stopping to do is the act of smoking tobacco, the act of smoking cigarettes. So those are like 3 main things where you would use no. Yeah, you should try to break it down every read. I'm a beginner, so I was curious to hear from more experienced people. We can talk about that a bit more in detail after the lesson. I'm going to be done in like 10 minutes, I think, and then let's get back to that topic. It's a good topic to sort of, how do I approach reading? How do I approach a sentence? So I will talk about that if I remember. I hope I will remember. All right. Let's make some space and then let's talk about a few cases where you should use koto. I'm deleting this. Okay. Koto is better when... And there's another 3 that we're going to look at. When... number 1. When it deals with conveying information, okay? When... Let me make this. I don't know why, but I feel it looks better when I capitalize it. Conveying information. When you convey information, this includes verbs such as hanasu or tsutaeru, right? You're conveying some sort of information, even like yakusoku suru, to promise something, because it's also sort of like an exchange of information. Hanasu especially, right? To talk about something. When you talk about something, commonly you'll use koto to nominalize that. Or tsutaeru. Tsutaeru means to relay something to someone, to tell something to someone, right? Tsutaeru has more to do with making someone else understand, right? To sort of relay an information to a person. So let's look at an example sentence of that. Boop. We will use this one here. Zemi ni oops. There. 出られないことを先生に伝えてください。Alright, good. We had to use 2 lines here because it's a bit of a longer sentence. And I'm going to maybe make... What am I doing? There. I'm just gonna make some space so that I have room to draw over it. Alright. That's not what I wanted. I wrote zehi instead of zemi. I don't even know what I wrote. Zemi ni. Yeah, zemi ni. Sorry, there you go. Now it's correct. So what does this mean? I'm gonna have to obviously help you probably with some vocab first. Zemi means a seminar or a lecture or something like that. Zemi ni derarenai. And this here, let's just this is potential form. We haven't talked about this yet, but for now, take my word for it when I'm saying it means to be able to show up. Or rather, derarenai is to not be able to show up. I won't be able to make it, right? I'm not gonna be able to show up there. Zemi ni derarenai. So I can't attend the lecture. I can't attend the seminar, right? I won't be able to make it to the seminar. Zemi ni derarenai. So here we have sort of this clause, zemi ni derarenai. Here I would say this is sort of like an indirect object. So I'll call it like maybe IO. Indirect object. It's not really a subject, it's not really the direct object, so indirect object. And here is our verb of the subordinate clause. And then, what's the difference of that and maniawanai? Maniawanai is more of a time thing, like I won't be able to make it because I don't have time. I'm not going to be able to do it in time. Whereas derarenai just means I can't do it, maybe for other reasons. Maybe because it's not even possible, right? Like, it's not a time thing, it's just not possible. So I would say that's like the main difference there. Maniau is always has to do with time, to be able to make it in time. Zemi ni derarenai koto o sensei ni tsutaete kudasai. So, tell sensei that I won't be able to make it to the seminar. Tsutaeru here, please tell, right? Tsutaete kudasai, we've talked about that in the past. Please tell the sensei, the teacher, something. What do we tell him? Overlying clause has its object here. Oh, well, actually, I should extend this all the way here. Tell him this. Tell him that I'm not going to be able to attend the seminar. That's what you're supposed to tell him, okay? And then this here is just, again, I would say sensei here, kind of an indirect object, and tsutaete kudasai are verb. Okay? Tell the sensei, tell the teacher that I'm not going to be able to make it to the seminar. We use koto because we are conveying information with tsutaeru here. Okay? Note that all these rules, by the way, they don't have as much to do with what's here in front of koto, but rather they have to do with what's after koto, right? The verb that we use after that we've used koto. That's much more important to decide whether we should use koto or not, is what we actually want to say about this clause. Not what the clause itself is saying, but what we want to say about it. That's what determines whether we use koto or no. In many cases, at least. Alright. Next one. This is koto desu. Okay, so when you are making a copula sentence or a copula statement, a declarative statement with this or da, then it's usually koto as well. You don't say like, you can say like no desu, but that's kind of a different nuance. That's more of an emphasis thing. But usually when you want to say like for example, we're going to look at the sentence about like my hobby. Point number 3. Sorry, it's point number 2. Point number 2. Let's say you want to talk about your hobby, right? So, when using like this and da, okay? Using this and da. So let's look at the sentence and you'll understand what I mean. Let's say you want to talk about your hobby. So, 私の趣味は、映画を、not 英語見ることです。We could use 見る here, either this one or maybe 見る、this one, 映画を見る Doesn't really matter. I'm gonna stick with the easier version. I mean, it kind of matters, but it's not. It's kind of more of a tiny nuance thing. So let's not worry too much about it. So I'm gonna use the easier kanji because it's just easier to understand or easier to read for most people. That's why. Before you say anything, okay, before anyone's like, but Eve, shouldn't we use the other miru? You could. You don't have to though. Most people will, like, this is a, you'll see this sentence all the time. It's fine. 私の趣味は my hobby, right? 私の趣味は映画を見ることです. So here we have a little bit of a different structure. The relative or the underlying clause is actually embedded inside the overlying clause. So our underlying clause here is 映画を, which is our object, and 見る, which is our verb. And the overlying clause actually starts here, where we have subject, or topic, right? Subject, which is also topic. Subject, and I'm gonna do like a little t, like topic, right? That's our topic. 私の趣味は映画を見ることです. And this is like our, you could say this is kind of like, here it's where it gets like difficult because this is like basically copula phrase, right? This is like the declarative statement. Like you have our nominalized phrase here, or rather here. So we treat this like a noun and then say this. So this is basically just a copula phrase, right? You could also have like one noun in here. And that's kind of also an important point, is that for all of these nominalized phrases could also just be replaced with one noun, theoretically, grammatically speaking. So what could be one noun that would fit in here, both in context and grammatically, would be something like 撮影. 撮影 means filming, like, you know, shooting a movie or taking pictures. You could say 私の趣味は撮影です, right? And that's just one noun at that point, 撮影. But we can still put it in there and it makes sense grammatically. And that's the magic of nominalization, is that basically we have a whole phrase, but it's really just, it's like a noun. It acts like a noun. It's like a noun, or it's like a phrase in disguise, dressed up as a noun, kind of. Right? So that's what's kind of convenient about it. Alright, good. And then lastly, another thing that we'll see with koto, what is it? Oh yeah, that one is quick. I don't even have to make example sentences for that one because I've already done that. 3, oops. That's sort of also what Uchi mentioned before, when using set phrases, okay? When using set phrases. And of course this is like what we said before, ことがある. ことがある, or stuff like ことができる, okay? So those always use こと anyways, because they're set phrase, well, you know, they are kind of set phrases. ことができる. So those, you would use こと because, you know, they always use こと. ことがある, ことができる is like set things. You don't have to really worry about it. So don't use no there because it would be weird. Okay, that's point 3. And that's like the main, those are like the main differences. Again, it probably helps to read the article again, maybe, if you want to. And like look at, I picked like one example sentence from each. There's 2. The person provided up to 2. So yeah, maybe it helps you to look at the other ones. Now, there's also cases where you can use either. For example, when you talk about, this was just one example, but when you say like 好きです, right? You want to say that you like something, you know, you can kind of use both, and there's not much of a difference. Let me see, right? So the sentence that this person uses is also like 僕はこうしてのんびり映画を見ることが好きだ versus 映画を見るのが好きだ. And there's really not much of a difference in that sentence. Let's copy it real quick so that we can look at it. Like we can say like, oh yeah, there's like this kind of nuance and that kind of nuance, but at the end of the day, these are like very, very similar whether we use 僕はこうしてのんびり映画を見ることが好きです。好きだ。Okay? So, this one here. 僕は I こうして like this のんびり映画を見る to watch movies in a relaxed manner, like relax and watch movies. ことが好きだ. I like that. I like watching movies and relaxing. And like we can replace this with no. And you know, in all honesty, there's not much of a difference here. こうして映画を見るの Netflix and chill, exactly. 映画を見るのが好きだ. So there are definitely cases where you can use both, and I would even go as far as to say even native speakers would, like, they might, this is one of those cases where they might tell you, yeah, it sounds kind of different, but I can't really say what the difference is. So, like, there is probably still, like, a difference in there, but at this point, we're so tiny and nuanced that really, as a learner, until you've done, like, I don't know, tens of thousands of hours of listening and you want to sound exactly like a native, I don't think you have to worry too much about it, okay? There's, like, one of those things where, sure, maybe there's still, like, a tiny difference in nuance, but, we're really splitting hairs now, and it would be a waste of your time to dig super deep, because you'd have to, like, probably find, like, linguistics papers about what exactly is, like, the difference and stuff like that, as a non-native. The other way of doing it is just get, like, literally thousands of hours of listening and reading practice, and then eventually you should just naturally know which one to use, because that's how our brains work. Remember, lesson 1, your brain's smart, trust your brain, except don't trust your brain, because sometimes your brain's stupid, but don't worry about that. What a great lesson. It's no wonder that people subscribe to me for all my great lessons. It's true, though. It's like you have to know when to trust your brain and when not to. That's another thing. All right. Now, I think that's basically it, okay? Let's do my main point, okay? Summary. It's summary time, everyone. Nominalization with no and koto. Just remember, the most important part of today's lesson is the formation of this. Verb plus no, or verb plus koto. That's the number one takeaway from today, is that these nominalize, okay? You can nominalize with these. They are a little bit different sometimes. We looked at some differences. However, the main point, you nominalize verb clauses, and again, I'm going to stress that as well. It's not really just the verb, it is really sort of the whole clause that gets packaged up, and you can make a statement about the whole clause. Once you have nominalized something, you get to use verbs slash clauses as nouns. And this is obviously the grammatical way of thinking about it. Okay, you get to use verbs slash clauses as nouns. And that's really useful. Is it common to see nested nominalizations? It happens. I don't know, it's probably common. I'd have to think. The thing is, like, it depends on what you're doing. Sentences can get really quote-unquote complicated in spoken language because people don't think about when they want to start and stop a sentence. Hypersmoke, konnichiwa. So things can get complicated. And then reading too, it depends on the author and what he likes to do. It can happen, yeah. You can definitely have nested nominalization. Up to 2 layers is pretty common. 3, 4, not as common. It's in general, like what we said about, like, relative clauses, you can actually have infinite layers. But there is sort of a reasonability to it, where at some point it's just not reasonable to expect anyone to understand what you're talking about if you make it too complicated. The same way in English, that, like, sometimes I have to sort of take a break. I have to sort of emphasize the end of a statement, because else you're not going to be able to follow me, right? And it's the same with that. And yeah, the other thing is also, again, since we just mentioned relative clauses, this structure is essentially the same as the one we mentioned with relative clauses, where you have verb plus noun, because no and koto both kind of work as nouns that get, like, this attributive clause attached to them. Sylvie, $50. Wait, whoa. Okay, damn. All right, I'll read that after. I'll read that in a bit. We're basically done with the lesson now. So yeah, wow, thank you very much. So that was it for the stuffs, okay? This is nominalization with no and koto in sort of an hour. I hope it was somewhat easy to follow. I know that the difference between no and koto is difficult. Yeah, dude, get whatever you want. I want it all. But these are, like, the main takeaways are, this is how you nominalize, and then once you've nominalized, you get to use them as nouns. All right. So, I hope you enjoyed that. There we go.